address of the Honorable Herbert Clapp the statements and accusations made against the Negro by ex-Governor Northern of Georgia in his memorable address before the Congregational Club at Tremont Temple, Boston, Massachusetts, May 22, 1899. In Chapter 15 I have made Will Smith's argument in answer to the Honorable Herbert Clapp, a combination of the best points made by well-known public speakers in the United States, white and black, in defense of the Negro. I feel my own deficiencies too strongly to attempt original composition on this subject at this crisis in the history of the Negro in the United States. I have introduced enough of the exquisitely droll humor peculiar to the Negro — a work like this would not be complete without it — to give a bright touch to an otherwise gruesome subject. The Author. End of Preface. Contending Forces by Pauline E. Hopkins, Chapter 1. A Retrospect of the Past. We wait beneath the furnace blast, the pangs of transformation. Not painlessly doth God recast, and mould anew the nation. Hot burns the fire where wrongs expire, nor spares the hand that from the land uproots the ancient evil. J. G. Whittier. In the early part of the year 1800, the agitation of the inhabitants of Great Britain over the increasing horrors of the slave trade carried on in the West Indian possessions of the empire was about reaching a climax. Every day the terrible things done to the slaves were becoming public talk, until the best English humanitarians, searching for light upon the subject, became sick at heart over the discoveries that they made, and were led to declare the principle, "The air of England is too pure for any slave to breathe." To go back a little way in the romantic history of the emancipation of the slaves in the islands will not take much time, and will, I hope, be as instructive as interesting. Tales of the abuses of the slaves, with all the sickening details, had reached the Quaker community as early as 1783, and that tender-hearted people looked about themselves to see what steps they could take to ameliorate the condition of the Negroes in the West Indies, and to discourage the continuation of the trade along the African coast. Thomas Clarkson, a student at Cambridge, was drawn into writing a prize essay on the subject, and became so interested that he allied himself with the Quakers and investigated the subject for himself, thereby confirming his own belief that Providence had never made that to be wise that was immoral, and that the slave trade was as impolitic as it was unjust. After strenuous efforts by Mr. Pitt and Mr. Fox, Parliament became interested and instituted an inquiry into the abuses of the slave trade. Finally, Mr. Wilberforce was drawn into the controversy, and for 16 years waged an incessant warfare against the planters, meeting with defeat in his plans for 10 consecutive years, but finally in 1807 he was successful, and the slave trade was abolished. These assailants of the slave trade had promised not to try to abolish slavery, but in a short time they learned that the trade was still carried on in ships sailing under the protection of false flags. Tales of the cruelties practiced upon the helpless chattels were continually reaching the ears of the British public, some of them such as to sicken the most cold-hearted and indifferent. For instance, causing a child to whip his mother until the blood ran. If a slave looked his master in the face, his limbs were broken. Women in the first stages of their accouchement, upon refusing to work, were placed in the treadmill, where terrible things happened, too dreadful to relate. Through the efforts of Granville Sharp, the chairman of the London Committee, Lord Stanley, Minister of the Colonies, introduced into the House of Commons his bill for emancipation. Lord Stanley's bill proposed gradual emancipation, and was the best thing those men of wisdom could devise. Earnestly devoted to their task, they sought to wipe from the fair escutcheon of the empire the awful blot which was upon it. By the adoption of the bill, Great Britain not only liberated a people from the cruelties of their masters, but at the same time took an important step forward in the onward march of progress, which the most enlightened nations are unconsciously forced.